Welcome to the deep dive. Ever considered that myopia control might be, well, more than meets the corneal surface?
Ah,
There's a
yeah,
whole world of activity happening, deeper in the eye, and today we're going to take a real renaissance look at some fascinating research.
that's a good one. Yeah, we're diving into a really compelling study just out in ophthalmology science. It gives us some crucial insights into how different myopia control lenses affect not just the retina, but also the choroid.
Ah, the choroid, that vital vascular layer that often flies a bit under the radar.
Exactly.
So, for all of you eye care professionals listening, you're right there on the front lines managing myopia. This study, it's called Effective Myopic Defocus on the Retina and Choroid, and its interaction with defocus regions, diurnal rhythm, and accommodation by Huang and colleagues. It offers some really valuable clues about the mechanisms.
Right, so our mission today is basically to unpack these findings, pull out the key takeaways, and see what it means for your practice.
We'll get into the study's design, look closely at the different lenses they tested, and really focus on the key measurements they took.
Yeah, the core of it will be understanding how these lenses impact choroidal thickness. But we'll also cover the retinal findings and the intriguing influence of things like diurnal rhythms and accommodation.
Okay, let's jump right in then. So the researchers, their main goal was to investigate how these different myopia control lenses, plus the time of day and near work, how all that affects the retina and, importantly, the choroid in adults with myopia.
Kind of decoding the eye's response to different optical signals, basically.
Makes sense.
And they used a pretty robust design. It was a within-subject setup. They had 21 adults aged 18 to 30 with myopia between -1 and -6 diopters.
Okay.
And each person wore 4 different test lenses, but on separate days.
Ah, so they could compare the effects within the same person?
Smart. Exactly. Direct comparison.
So what were these optical contenders? Let's look at the lenses. First up, the single vision soft contact lens.
Yep, the SVCL. That was the control, the baseline, no specific myopia control features.
Got it. Standard correction. What was next?
Next was a bifocal spectacle lens, the BSL. It had a +350 diopter addition, but just in the lower part.
Okay, like a traditional bifocal setup.
Right, creating that clear difference in power across the visual field. Then they had the DIMS lens defocus incorporated multiple segments.
Ah, the one with the little lenslets.
That's the one. Spectacle lenses, central zone for distance, and then surrounded by lots of these small lenslets, also with a +350 add, but in the periphery.
Creates that widespread peripheral myopic defocus, right?
Precisely. And finally, the dual focus soft contact lens, or DFCL.
The multifocal contact.
Yeah, alternating concentric zones, one for distance and one with a +2 diopter near power. Creates that simultaneous focus effect on the cornea.
Wow, okay. So quite a range of designs. And each participant tried all four.
Yep, every single one.
And it wasn't just about wearing them. They had specific tasks.
Right, they didn't just, read a chart.
Yeah.
They had them do 20 minutes of distance viewing looking at 4 meters.
Okay.
And then 20 minutes of near viewing really close at 20 centimeters.
Wow, that's quite a near demand.
It is. And they did this with each lens, both in the morning, around 10 a.m., and then again later in the afternoon, about 5 p.m.
Quite the schedule for those participants.
Definitely. And after each of those viewing sessions, they brought out the imaging tech, OCT, and OCT angiography.
Okay, getting the detailed pictures.
Exactly. Allowed them to measure non-invasively things like retinal thickness, choroidal thickness, and even the density of those tiny capillary networks in the retina and choroid. Really detailed stuff.
Crucial for seeing the subtle effects.
For sure. And for those listeners who want to dig really deep into the methods, we've put a link to the actual study in the podcast description.
Great. So beyond just thickness, what specific things were they tracking with those scans?
So several key outcome measures. The main ones were retinal thickness, RT, and choroidal thickness, CHT. That gives you the structural info.
Right.
But they also measured vessel density. So retinal superficial vessel density, RSVD, and the deeper ones, RDVD, looking at the microvasculature.
And they looked at the choroid's vessels too.
They did. They quantified choroidal vessel density, CVD, and even the choriocapillaris vessel density, CCVD. So really assessing the perfusion down there.
Comprehensive.
Yeah. And while this study was really about the immediate effects, they did measure axial length too.
But probably didn't expect big changes there in just 20 minutes.
Exactly. Not significant changes over that short a time.
Okay, so they took all these detailed measurements. What did they find? Let's get to the results, especially regarding the choroid. That seems like the hot topic here.
It really is. And they found statistically significant differences in how choroidal thickness changed between the lenses.
Okay. Under which conditions?
Specifically after the near viewing task, both in the morning and evening. And also after distance viewing, but only in the morning session.
Interesting. No difference between lenses after distance viewing in the evening.
Apparently not, which suggests, time of day might be interacting here somehow.
Okay, so time matters. But what about the lenses themselves? Which ones had the biggest impact, or maybe the least impact, on that choroidal thickness change?
Well, the single vision lens, the SVCL control, that one consistently led to greater reductions in choroidal thickness.
So more thinning with the standard correction.
Right. Compared to all three of the myopia control lenses, the BSL, DIMS, and DFCL. And that was true after both distance and near viewing in the morning and after near viewing in the evening.
Okay, so the myopia control lenses were generally better at maintaining thickness compared to single vision. Was there a winner among them?
Actually, yes. The bifocal spectacle lens, the BSL, showed the least reduction in choroidal thickness across those conditions.
Really? The BSL? That's quite interesting.
It is. It suggests that maybe the way that bifocal presents the defocus,
Yeah.
that distinct distance zone plus the near add, might be particularly good at keeping the choroid thicker, especially during near work.
Better than the more sort of uniform peripheral defocus from DIMS or the simultaneous focus from DSCL, at least in this study.
Seems that way, yeah.
That's a really neat finding. So the BSL seems to have a bit of an edge in preserving choroidal thickness, especially for near tasks. But here's the big question. Did any of them completely stop the choroid from thinning during near work?
The million-dollar question. And the answer, well, unfortunately, is no.
Oh, okay.
None of the lenses managed to completely prevent the choroid from thinning after that 20-centimeter near viewing task.
So it might leave you feeling a bit lensless in fighting that specific effect.
Huh. Yeah, you could say that. It really highlights that while these lenses help, they don't fully counteract those short-term accommodative effects on the choroid.
Okay, so accommodation still wins out to some extent, even with the myopic defocus. But you mentioned the time of day interaction earlier.
Yes, exactly. The researchers found that the myopia control lenses, BSL, DIMS, and DSCL, they were actually more effective at inhibiting that choroidal thinning in the morning compared to the evening.
More effective in the morning.
Yeah, especially when you compare it to how much thinning they saw with the single vision lens in the morning versus the evening. It seems the eye's response to these optical signals might change throughout the day.
Like our internal clock influences how the choroid reacts. Fascinating. And you said the BSL, the bifocal spec, stood out with the least thinning. Did the researchers guess why?
They speculated a bit. Maybe it's the way the defocus is presented to the superior retina with that design. Or perhaps just the distinct zones, that specific pattern of defocus. Maybe the choroid just sort of responds better to that optical recipe.
Interesting. What about the other two myopia control lenses, the DIMS and the DFCL? They had different add powers, right? Plus 3.50 for DIMS and plus 2.00 for DFCL. Did that make a difference?
You'd think it might, wouldn't you? But interestingly, no. The study found no statistically significant difference in the choroidal thickness changes between the DIMS lens, plus 3.50D, and the DFCL, plus 2.00.
Really? So the amount of plus wasn't the deciding factor there?
Not in this study, it seems. It's a key finding, actually. It suggests that maybe, within this range at least, the specific lens design and how it works with the eye's optics might be more important than just the raw diopter number of the ad, especially for this short-term choroidal response in adults.
That's quite surprising. Goes against the simple, more defocus is better idea. Okay, we've focused a lot on the choroid, which is clearly dynamic. What about the retina itself? Did these lenses affect retinal thickness or blood vessels?
Yeah, important to check that too. And the reassuring news here is, not really.
Oh.
They found no significant differences in retinal thickness changes. Not between the lenses, not based on time of day, not in different retinal regions, didn't matter if it was distance or near viewing.
So the retina seems pretty stable structurally.
It appears much more stable, yes. Less immediately reactive to these short-term defocus changes compared to the choroid, which seems much more dynamic.
That's good to know. We definitely don't want unintended consequences on the retina. What about the retinal blood vessels?
They did see some regional differences in the superficial and deep vessel density after viewing, but differences between the lenses were pretty limited.
Any significant ones?
Only one, really. In the deep retinal vessels, in the nasal region, after distance viewing in the morning, the DFCL showed slightly greater changes there compared to BSL and DIMS.
Okay, a minor point perhaps.
Yeah, overall the takeaway was that myopic defocus, diurnal rhythm, accommodation, They had minimal immediate impact on retinal thickness and most of the retinal vessel density measures in these adults.
Good. And just to confirm on axial length, the key measure for long-term myopia progression, no changes there in the short term.
Nope, as expected. No significant differences in axial length changes between lenses or times. This study was really looking at those immediate choroidal and retinal responses.
Right. So putting it together, we've got this interesting interaction. Diurnal rhythm seems to matter. The morning seems to be a better time for these lenses to inhibit choroidal thinning.
Exactly. The findings really point to this temporal effect, like the eye is more receptive to that myopic defocus signal earlier in the day.
And even with the plus 3.50 or plus 2.00 D ads, they weren't quite enough to fully stop the choroidal thinning caused by that intense near-work simulation,
Right.
which they figured was like plus 5.0 D of accommodation.
Right. That's a key point. It suggests the amount of defocus in some current designs might not be enough to completely neutralize the choroidal squeeze from heavy near work.
Something for us to keep in mind when advising patients about near work, even when they're wearing these lenses.
Definitely. It's not a magic bullet that negates accommodation effects entirely, at least not based on this short-term data.
Now, we should, of course, talk about the study's limitations. Every study has them.
Absolutely. And the researchers were upfront about them.
Yeah.
First, the sample size 21 people. It's good preliminary data, but, relatively small.
Okay.
Second, these were adults. The primary target for myopia control is kids, and their eyes might respond differently. We can't just assume it's the same.
Good point. Children's eyes are still developing. What else?
Well, the near viewing task was straight ahead, at a fixed screen. Real-world near work is often, looking down, different distances.
Yeah, not quite the same posture or visual demand.
Right. And they mostly looked at the superior retina for those defocus region effects. Plus, it was only a 20-minute wear time for each condition. Hard to say much about long-term myopia control from that.
Limits the conclusions about effectiveness over months or years.
Exactly. And they also mentioned potential issues with the washout period between testing the different lenses and how that might interact with the diurnal rhythms they were measuring.
Okay, so acknowledging those limitations, what are the main clinical takeaways? What should practitioners listening be thinking about based on this research?
I think it reinforces that these myopic defocus lenses do inhibit choroidal thinning compared to single vision. And in this study, the BSL seemed particularly effective, especially in the morning and during near work.
But not complete inhibition.
No, not complete. And that finding about the superior retina maybe being more sensitive, that needs more looking into.
It really highlights just how dynamic the choroid is, doesn't it? Responding to these optical signals and maybe even the time of day.
Absolutely. That timing aspect might be more important than we previously thought.
So the take-home seems to be that it's complex. Lens design matters, timing might matter, the amount of near work definitely matters. It's all interacting.
Precisely. It's this interplay between the optics we provide and the eye's own biology and rhythms. It's not just about the diopters of defocus.
This definitely gives us a lot to chew on, makes you think. Could lens designs be refined further based on this? Or how should we approach prescribing? And what about future research digging into this defocus amount versus diurnal rhythm versus accommodation, especially in kids?
So many questions still. It's such a fast-moving field. Understanding these mechanisms is really key to improving our strategies.
Absolutely.
And we definitely encourage you to follow our podcast for more deep dives into the latest research like this.
Yeah, please do. And if you found this discussion insightful today, maybe learned something new or got some ideas, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating. It helps other eye care pros find the show.
It really does.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the choroid's response. Until next time, keep those eyes healthy and keep asking questions.